Tonight should have been a celebration. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of laughter, love, and the kind of intimacy that made the world feel smaller, more manageable. The restaurant was packed with familiar faces, our closest friends gathered to toast to Sophie and me, glasses clinking in endless congratulations. And yet, something felt off. I noticed it in the way Sophie's hand lingered on Daniel's arm when she laughed at his joke. The way their eyes met a second too long, as if sharing a private conversation in a crowded room. Daniel, my best friend since college, the man who had stood beside me on my wedding day. They had always been close, sure. We had all been friends for years. But tonight, something was different. I tried to ignore it, forcing a smile as I raised my glass. To my beautiful wife, I said, my voice steady despite the churn in my gut. 5 years feels like a heartbeat. Here's to a lifetime more. Sophie smiled, radiant, perfect. She leaned over and kissed me, soft and sweet, as our friends cheered. But even as her lips met mine, I could feel it. The distance. The first crack in the glass. Then it happened. She excused herself to go to the bar, leaving her phone on the table. A message popped up. A name I knew all too well. Daniel. I can't wait to feel you again. Tonight? The world tilted. I stared at the words, my breath frozen in my chest, my fingers tightening around my glass until I thought it might shatter. Around me, the restaurant buzzed with life, laughter, and clinking silverware, completely unaware that my life had just come crashing down. Sophie returned a moment later, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. What did I miss? She asked, slipping back into her seat beside me. I forced myself to meet her gaze. Nothing. Not yet. The message burned in my mind, the words etching themselves into the space where trust used to live. I can't wait to feel you again. Tonight? It played on a loop, a relentless, mocking whisper in the back of my skull. And yet, I smiled. I laughed in all the right places, clinked glasses when someone made a toast. I played the role of the devoted husband, the man celebrating 5 years of what everyone assumed was a perfect marriage. Sophie, oblivious, leaned into me, her fingers grazing mine beneath the table. A gesture she had done 1,000 times before. But tonight, it felt foreign. Staged. Daniel sat across from me, grinning, his arm draped over the back of his chair, completely at ease. My best friend. My brother in all but blood. How many times had we sat together like this, sharing drinks, swapping stories? How many times had I confided in him about Sophie, about the way she made me feel, the little things she did that drove me crazy in the best possible way? And all this time, he had been with her. Touching her. Feeling her. A slow, creeping heat crawled up my spine. I wanted to grab him by the collar, drag him outside, demand answers, demand the truth. I wanted to see his face when he realized I knew. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I turned to Sophie, brushing a strand of hair from her face, my thumb lingering at her jaw. She smiled at me, genuinely, I think. I used to believe I knew every version of that smile. But now? I wasn't so sure. Dance with me? I said suddenly. She blinked, surprised. What? I stood, offering my hand. It's our anniversary. One dance, Mrs. Carter. Around us, a few people cheered, laughing as Sophie let me pull her to her feet. The restaurant had a small dance floor near the bar, and as the music shifted to something slow and romantic, I wrapped my arms around my wife, the woman I had promised forever to, and pulled her close. She melted into me, her head resting against my chest, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume, the warmth of her against me. For a fleeting second, I wanted to believe this was real, that I had imagined the message, that Sophie was still mine, and Daniel was still my friend, and nothing had changed. But the truth was there, pulsing between us like a third presence in the room. So I leaned down, my lips brushing her ear. Are you happy, Sophie? She pulled back slightly, looking up at me with confusion. Of course, I am. Why? I smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Just wondering. I watched her carefully, searching for any flicker of guilt, of hesitation. But she was good too good. And so was I. For the rest of the night, I pretended. I held her hand, kissed her temple, whispered things that made her laugh. I even poured Daniel a drink, raising my glass to his as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was waiting, watching, and planning. Tonight, I wouldn't confront her. Tonight, I would let her go to him. And then, I would make sure neither of them saw it coming. By the time we left the restaurant, I had made my decision. Sophie clung to my arm as we walked to the car, her body warm against mine. She was in a good mood, laughing, teasing me about how much champagne I had drunk, oblivious to the weight pressing down on my chest. I played along. When we got home, I kissed her. Slowly. Deeply. I wanted to see if I could still feel something, if I could still believe this was real. For a moment, I almost convinced myself. Then she pulled away first. A small thing. Barely noticeable. But I felt it. That hesitation. That flicker of guilt beneath the surface. She yawned, stretching her arms above her head. I think I'm going to take a shower, she said casually. Too much champagne. Go ahead, I murmured. I'll be in bed. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and disappeared into the bathroom. I didn't follow. Instead, I waited. Waited for the sound of running water. Waited for the moment I knew would come. When I crept into the bedroom, her phone was exactly where she had left it on the nightstand. Face down. Silent. I picked it up, my pulse steady. A quick glance at the screen, and there it was. One unread message from Daniel. I swiped. I'll be at the usual place. See you soon. The usual place. How many times had she gone to him while I slept? While I worked? While I loved her? I exhaled slowly, placing the phone back exactly as I had found it. When Sophie stepped out of the bathroom minutes later, wrapped in a towel, hair damp and skin flushed, I was lying in bed, feigning sleep. She tiptoed across the room, picked up her phone, and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, quietly, she turned away, slipped into the closet, and emerged minutes later dressed in jeans and a sweater. She stood by the door for a moment, watching me, checking to see if I was asleep. Then, without a word, she left. The second the front door clicked shut behind her, I sat up, heart hammering. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, and followed. If she was walking into his arms tonight, she was walking straight into my trap. The night air was crisp, the cold biting through my jacket as I stepped outside. Sophie was already backing out of the driveway, her taillights glowing red in the darkness. I stood in the shadows for a moment, watching her leave, memorizing the way she didn't hesitate. She had done this before. I slid into my car, gripping the wheel tightly as I followed. My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from something colder, something sharper. The man I had once been, the one who trusted blindly, who believed in the sacred bond of marriage, was dead. Tonight, I was someone else. Sophie drove like a woman on a mission, never once checking her mirrors, never once hesitating at a turn. I kept a safe distance, careful not to get too close. I didn't need her to suspect anything. 10 minutes later, she pulled into a small boutique hotel on the edge of town. Not some rundown roadside motel. Not some sleazy dive where people want to make mistakes. No, this was calculated. Discreet. A place where lovers met in secret. I parked a block away and killed the engine. From my car, I had a perfect view of the entrance. Sophie stepped out, adjusting her sweater, running a hand through her hair, fixing herself for him. For Daniel. A few minutes passed. Then his car pulled in. He parked a few spots away from her, cautious, like he didn't want to be seen arriving together. But I saw everything. I saw the way he looked at her when he stepped out of his car. The way she smiled, so easy, so natural, as if she hadn't just left her husband to sleep in bed. My stomach twisted, but I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. No emotions. No weakness. Not now. Daniel placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward the entrance. He leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh. Then they disappeared inside. I exhaled, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. There it was. The truth. Undeniable. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of their cars side by side. A little insurance. Then I stepped out into the cold night, shoving my hands into my pockets as I walked toward the hotel. I wasn't here to stop them. I was here to watch them burn. The lobby was quiet, the kind of place designed for discretion. Soft lighting, a receptionist who barely glanced up as guests came and went, and a lingering scent of expensive cologne masking the stench of betrayal. I didn't walk straight to the front desk. That would be too obvious. Instead, I moved slowly, my eyes scanning the room, noting the exits, the security cameras. A couple passed by me, laughing softly, lost in their own world. Just like Sophie and Daniel. I spotted them near the elevator. Sophie's back was to me, her long hair falling over her shoulder as she tilted her head up toward Daniel, listening intently. He leaned in, his lips grazing her ear. A private joke. A secret. They stepped inside the elevator, and as the doors began to close, Sophie turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her face. She was glowing. Not the tired Sophie I had seen at home, not the wife who had grown distant, whose smiles for me had become hollow and routine. No, this Sophie was alive, breathless with anticipation. For him. The doors slid shut. I waited a moment, then approached the front desk, my expression calm, my voice steady. "Excuse me," I said, flashing a polite smile. "I think my wife just checked in, but she forgot her phone in the car. Room 214, right?" The receptionist, a woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes, barely looked at me. "Let me check," she murmured, tapping at her keyboard. My heart pounded as I watched her. She frowned slightly, then nodded. "They just checked in. 214. Bingo." I thanked her and walked away, slipping into the stairwell instead of taking the elevator. I needed time to think. What was I going to do? Burst in? Drag them out by their throats? Cause a scene? No. Too messy. Too predictable. I needed proof. I needed leverage. I reached the second floor, stepping into the hallway lined with numbered doors. 214 was at the far end, past a potted plant and a vending machine humming quietly in the dim light. I moved slowly, my footsteps silent against the carpet. I stopped outside the door, pressing my hand against the cool surface. Soft laughter. A muffled voice, Daniel's. Then Sophie's, warm and breathy, the way she used to sound when she whispered secrets to me in the dark. I clenched my jaw. I didn't need to see them. I had heard enough. But still, I crouched low, peering through the tiny sliver of light between the door and the frame. Sophie stood with her back against the wall, Daniel's hands braced on either side of her. She was smiling up at him, her fingers curled into his shirt as he leaned closer. Not yet touching, but almost. I should have felt rage. Should have wanted to throw the door open, to knock him to the ground, to demand how she could do this to me. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I hit record. I captured it all. The way she looked at him. The way she let him touch her. The way her lips parted just before he kissed her. And then, when I had enough, I stood. I slid my phone back into my pocket. And I walked away. I walked out of the hotel and into the cold night air, my pulse steady, my breath visible in the chill. The old me, the man who would have begged for an explanation, who would have let heartbreak consume him, was dead. In his place stood someone else. Someone colder. Smarter. Patient. I sat in my car for a while, letting the anger settle into something useful. I replayed the video on my phone. Sophie against the wall, Daniel leaning in, their hands tangled in something that used to belong to me. This was my wife. This was my best friend. And they thought they were getting away with it. A humorless chuckle slipped past my lips. Not a chance. I didn't confront them that night. No, that would have been too easy. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them to think they had one. So I went home. I showered, I poured myself a drink, and I did something I hadn't done in months. I slept. And in the morning, I woke up with a plan. Sophie came home at dawn. I heard the soft click of the front door, the quiet rustling as she took off her coat, careful not to wake me. It was almost funny. She had no idea I had been awake for hours, sitting in the dark, waiting. I stayed in bed, listening to the faint sounds of her tiptoeing around the house. The water running in the bathroom. The scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Finally, she slipped under the covers beside me. She sighed softly, curling her body toward mine, her arm draping over my chest like she hadn't spent the night in another man's arms. "Morning," she whispered sleepily. I didn't move, didn't react. Just let her hold me, let her pretend. And then, after a long pause, I did the same. I turned toward her, wrapped my arms around her, and pulled her close. I kissed the top of her head, inhaling deeply, letting her believe, just for a little while longer, that I was still hers. She sighed again, content. "I love you," she murmured against my skin. I smiled. "I love you too." For the next few days, I played my role to perfection. I kissed Sophie like nothing had changed. I laughed at Daniel's jokes when we met up for drinks. I listened as she told me about her long days at work, nodding in understanding, when I knew exactly where she had been and exactly who she had been with. Every moment, every touch, every word felt like a game I was destined to win. Because I wasn't just waiting. I was preparing. I started small. Sophie always left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, her emails and messages just a few clicks away. One evening, while she showered, I scrolled through her inbox. At first, nothing stood out, just work updates, promotions, the usual. But then, buried beneath mundane emails, I found them. The reservations. The receipts. The deleted messages she thought were gone forever. And Daniel? He was just as sloppy. A private email chain. A forwarded receipt from a jewelry store. A hotel confirmation for the next week, The same hotel I had followed them to. I took screenshots. I saved everything. Proof. Undeniable, inescapable proof. And then, I went a step further. I accessed our shared bank account and quietly transferred half of our savings into my private one. Not enough to be suspicious, just enough to secure my exit when the time came. The best part? She didn't even notice. She was too caught up in her affair, too busy sneaking around, too certain that she was getting away with it. But soon, she would learn. No one gets away with betraying me. A week later, I got my opportunity. Daniel invited me to his house for a poker night. Just the guys, he had said, like we used to do before life got in the way. Sophie encouraged me to go, even smiling as she kissed me goodbye. She had no idea I had already seen her latest text to Daniel. See you after he leaves. Can't wait. I went anyway. Sat across from Daniel, watching him laugh, watching him pretend he was still my best friend. It took everything in me not to reach across the table and wipe the smirk off his face. Instead, I played along. I drank. I cracked jokes. I let him win a few rounds. And when the night started winding down, I leaned back in my chair, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Then, I looked Daniel straight in the eye and said, "You know, man, I was thinking we should take a trip. You, me, and Sophie. Just like old times." His fingers twitched slightly as he reached for his beer. A tiny reaction. But I caught it. He forced a grin. "Yeah? Where to?" I smirked. "Someplace private. Where there aren't any secrets." For the first time all night, Daniel looked uneasy. Good. Because the best part of revenge isn't just watching them suffer. It's making them wonder when the knife will strike. I could see it happening slowly, subtly. The cracks were forming. Daniel had always been confident, always the smooth talker, but ever since poker night, something in him had shifted. He laughed a little less, checked his phone a little more, caught himself looking at me for a second too long, as if searching for some sign that I knew. And Sophie? She was starting to sense it too. The way I touched her now, so gentle, so patient, like I was savoring her. The way I studied her when she spoke, watching every flicker of emotion cross her face. She thought it was love. She had no idea it was the beginning of the end. A few nights later, I decided to push a little further. We were having dinner at home, just the two of us, candlelight flickering between us. She had made pasta, her favorite. I watched as she twirled her fork absent-mindedly, lost in thought. I poured us both another glass of wine, letting the moment stretch before I spoke. "You seem distracted lately," I murmured, watching her closely. She looked up, startled for half a second before masking it with a soft smile. "Work has been crazy," she said easily. "A lot going on." I nodded, swirling the wine in my glass. "Yeah? Must be exhausting." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It is. You know how it is, long days, late nights." Late nights. I took a slow sip, letting the words hang in the air. Then, I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. "Maybe we should take a vacation," I said, squeezing gently. "Just you and me. Get away from everything." Her lips parted slightly, and I saw it, the momentary panic in her eyes before she forced another smile. "Really?" she asked. "Of course," I said smoothly. "It's been too long since we had time just for us." She hesitated, pulling her hand back to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "A nervous habit." "Let me check with work," she said quickly. "I think things are a little crazy right now, but I'd love that." Liar. I smiled like I believed her. "Let me know." I watched her that night as she moved through our home, glancing at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, biting her lip in quiet worry. She was beginning to feel it now. The shift. The weight of a lie waiting to be exposed. And that was what I wanted. Not just revenge. Not just to catch her. I wanted her to unravel. To sit in the same anxiety I had felt. To lie awake at night wondering if she was about to lose everything. Because she was. Sophie was breaking. I saw it in the way she flinched when her phone buzzed. In the way she stole glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. She had always been composed, always sure of herself. But now? Now, she was drowning. And Daniel? He was slipping too. He had started canceling our usual meetups, dodging my calls, offering weak excuses when I casually suggested grabbing a drink. The confidence was fading. The cocky ease he had carried all these years was unraveling thread by thread. They didn't know what was wrong, but they could feel it. That was the best part. I hadn't accused them. I hadn't confronted them. I had only waited. And still, they were already falling apart. That Friday, I made my move. Sophie was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen. Daniel, we need to talk. I think he knows. I smirked. Right on schedule. I picked up her phone, walked to the bathroom door, and knocked lightly. Soft. I called out, keeping my voice calm. The water stopped abruptly. A beat of silence. Then, yeah. You left your phone out here, I said casually. Daniel just texted you. Silence. Then, the sound of the shower door creaking open. I'll check it later, she said quickly, her voice tight. I held her phone in my hand for another second, long enough for her to wonder if I was going to read it. Then, I set it down. Okay, I said, my tone unreadable. I walked away, leaving her there, soaking wet and terrified. Let her sit with it. Let her panic. Let her heart pound like mine had when I first saw those messages. This wasn't just about catching her. This was about letting her feel it. The next night, I set the final trap. I told Sophie I had to work late, that I wouldn't be home until after midnight. She nodded a little too quickly, a little too eagerly. Oh, she said, trying to hide her relief. That sucks. I know. I sighed, kissing her cheek. I hate missing a Saturday night with you. I walked out the door, got in my car, and drove away. But I didn't go far. I parked 2 blocks down, turned off the engine, and waited. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, Sophie walked out the door. Dressed up, hairstyled, looking over her shoulder like a criminal. I gripped the steering wheel, watching as she got into her car and drove off. Straight to Daniel's house. Perfect. I gave her 10 minutes. Then I followed. Tonight, they would finally know what it felt like to be caught. The drive to Daniel's house felt surreal. I wasn't the same man who had once trusted blindly, who had laughed with him over drinks, who had kissed Sophie without hesitation. That man was gone. Now, I was the one pulling the strings. As I neared Daniel's neighborhood, I turned off my headlights and parked a few houses down. His place was exactly as I remembered. Modern, sleek, the kind of home that screamed success. The kind of home where my wife felt comfortable betraying me. I stepped out of my car and moved carefully through the shadows, my footsteps silent against the pavement. I had to be smart. This wasn't about rage. It was about control. Sophie's car was in the driveway. The lights inside the house were dim, but I could see shadows moving through the curtains. Them. Together. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. I wasn't here to break down the door. No, I had something better in mind. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Live recording, on. Then, I walked straight up to the house. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I simply reached for the door handle and found it unlocked. Sloppy, Daniel. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The living room was empty, but I could hear them down the hall. Voices. Laughter. I followed the sound. My pulse was steady, my grip on my phone tight, as I moved toward the slightly ajar bedroom door. I could already picture it. Sophie wrapped around him, his hands on her, their whispers of deceit. I didn't need to imagine, because when I pushed the door open, I saw it. Sophie was on the bed, Daniel leaning over her, his shirt halfway unbuttoned. Their smiles vanished the second they saw me. A perfect, frozen moment. I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch, watching their faces shift from shock to horror. Then I spoke. Don't stop on my account. Sophie gasped, scrambling to sit up, yanking the sheets around her. This isn't what it looks like. Daniel cursed, running a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. I smirked. There was no escape. I held up my phone, the red recording light blinking. Smile for the camera. And then, I did something neither of them expected. I laughed. Because for the first time in weeks, I was the one in control. And this was only the beginning. Sophie stared at me, her face pale, her lips trembling as she clutched the sheet to her chest like it could somehow protect her from the inevitable. Daniel, on the other hand, was already shifting into damage control mode. His jaw tightened, his hands balled into fists. Listen, man, I held up a hand, cutting him off. Spare me, I said, my voice calm. Too calm. The tension in the room was suffocating. Sophie opened her mouth, then closed it, as if searching for some excuse, some pathetic attempt at salvaging what was left. But what was there to save? She had already burned us to the ground. You should have locked the door, I mused, glancing around the room. Not very smart for someone who's been sneaking around behind my back. Sophie swallowed hard. I was going to tell you. I laughed. Cold. Empty. Oh. When? Before or after you finished screwing my best friend? She winced, guilt flashing across her face. It wasn't. Don't lie, I interrupted, stepping closer. Not now. Not when I have proof. I turned my phone toward them, the screen still blinking red. Still recording. Daniel shot to his feet. Turn that off. I arched a brow. Or what? His fist clenched at his sides, but he didn't move. Because he knew. He knew that I had already won. Relax, I said, tucking my phone into my pocket. This isn't for the internet. This is just insurance. Sophie looked at me then, her eyes wide, desperate. Please, let's talk about this. I tilted my head. Talk? No? All right, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Let's talk. Tell me, Sophie, how long? She hesitated, glancing at Daniel like he could somehow save her. He couldn't. 3 months, she whispered. I nodded, my jaw tightening. Liar. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. 6, he muttered. Sophie's head snapped toward him, eyes wide. Daniel. I smiled. There it is. 6 months. Half a year of betrayal. Was it worth it? I asked softly. Throwing everything away? Sophie's lower lip trembled. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed again, shaking my head. That's the thing about cheating, Sophie. It doesn't just happen. Silence. Thick and heavy. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. You know, I thought about losing my mind. Screaming. Throwing punches. But honestly, I met her eyes, my voice dropping to a whisper. You're not worth it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Good. I turned to Daniel, who was watching me with careful eyes. And you? I smirked. You were my brother. His mouth opened, but no words came. Because what could he say? I hope she was worth it, I said simply, stepping back into the hallway. Sophie stood quickly, reaching for me. Wait, where are you going? I paused, looking at her. Then, I smiled. Home. A home without her. And with that, I walked out, leaving them behind in the mess they had created. I wasn't heartbroken. I was free. I drove home in silence. No music. No thoughts racing in my head. Just the sound of the road beneath my tires, the cold night air seeping in through the cracked window. I should have been angry. I should have been devastated. But I wasn't. I felt light. Like a man who had just walked away from a burning building, without a single regret. When I stepped inside our house, my house now, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to our bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing. Not for me, for her. Everything Sophie owned went into that suitcase in a matter of minutes. Her clothes. Her jewelry. Even the little things she always left scattered around. The perfume on the dresser, the book she never finished. I tossed it all in. Then, I pulled out my phone and sent her a single text. Your things are waiting for you. Don't come inside. I set the suitcase by the front door. Then, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and poured myself a drink. I sat at the dining table, the same one where we had once laughed, shared meals, built a life together. And I drank. Not in sadness. In celebration. Because tonight, I wasn't the man who lost everything. I was the man who walked away before the fire could consume him. By morning, Sophie was gone. The suitcase was missing from the porch, no message left behind. Good. A week later, the divorce papers were sent. I didn't wait for explanations or apologies. There was nothing left to say. Daniel? His fiancée dumped him the moment she found out. His life fell apart just as spectacularly as my marriage had. Karma. Beautiful, merciless karma. Months later, I saw Sophie again. She was sitting at a cafe, alone, staring at her phone like she was waiting for a message that would never come. She saw me. Our eyes met for a second, just long enough for me to see it. Regret. But I just smiled. I raised my coffee and a mock toast. Then, without a word, I turned and walked away. Some betrayals deserve forgiveness. This wasn't one of them. And as I stepped into the sunlight, feeling the weight of her completely disappear, I knew one thing for certain. She had lost me forever. And I had never felt freer. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.